If you haven't smashed that subscribe button and hit like, do it now, because what happened inside Angola will change how you see prison life forever. The corridor smelled like metal, sweat, and the bitter tang of fear. Cell Block D was silent in the aftermath of last night's chaos, yet every surface hummed with tension, as if the concrete and steel walls themselves were holding their breath. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting jagged shadows that stretched across the narrow passageways, highlighting every dent, scratch, and smear left by the prisoner's restless hands. Somewhere far off, a distant alarm had stopped hours ago, but its echo lingered, bouncing off the cement and iron with every step. Sergeant Hardy, a veteran with more than 20 years inside the Louisiana State Penitentiary, walked cautiously, flashlight cutting a narrow path into the darkness. Beside him, a younger guard fumbled with a radio, eyes darting to every corner as if expecting the walls themselves to move. They were accompanied by a team of investigators, one of whom, Claire Donovan, kept a notebook ready, digital tablet in hand, her eyes sharp, scanning every inch of the block for clues. The first cell they inspected revealed the remnants of desperation. Bunks were overturned, mattresses shredded, drawers torn from their frames, and fragments of concrete scattered across the floor. A faint layer of dust coated every surface, but near the back of the cell, a wall had been chipped away. Tiny cracks traced a slow line along the concrete, fresh and raw, as if someone had been digging inch by inch for weeks. Standing near the far wall, arms crossed and tattoos catching the flicker of the flashlight, was Marcus Scar Rivers. Jagged crowns and coiled serpents ran across his forearms, symbols of dominance and loyalty within Angola's tattooed social hierarchy. Scar didn't speak. He simply observed the investigators, his eyes dark and unreadable, yet every movement was precise, controlled, like a predator measuring the landscape. Further down the block, more cells bore the marks of unrest. Graffiti stretched across walls in sharp, uneven letters, freedom or death, no chains, and symbols only the inmates understood. Scuff marks, small pools of dried blood under mattresses, and broken cigarette butts littered the floors. The silence was deceptive. It was the quiet before the storm. Luis Coyote Ramirez's cell stood at the end of the corridor, empty. His serpentine tattoo slithered along the forearm in one blurred photograph taken from the last active camera feed, the only proof he had been there. The bunk was disheveled, the floor littered with small fragments of concrete and dust, the residue of a carefully carved tunnel. His disappearance had triggered a code red, an escape attempt suspected, a lockdown imposed. The investigation team moved in, flashlights slicing through the shadows. Surveillance cameras, some offline, some looping previously recorded footage, offered incomplete records of the night. The timestamp on the last clear frame, 2:13 a.m. A shadow slipping past a cell door, a tattooed arm visible, unmistakably Ramirez. But the footage cut out before he reached the maintenance corridors, leaving only questions in its wake. Guards tightened their formation as a distant clang echoed down the hall. Something shifted in the shadows, a scrape of metal, the faintest whisper of movement. Rookie Jenkins, the young guard assigned to this wing, gripped his baton, tattoos of dice and cards along his knuckles flexing nervously as his eyes darted to the floor and ceiling. He wasn't alone in feeling the pressure. Every man and woman inside the block sensed the threat lurking unseen, the tension vibrating through the air like static. As Donovan crouched near the exposed tunnel seam, dust rising with every movement, the investigators' flashlights revealed the dark void beneath. Moisture dripped somewhere far below, a faint, hollow echo bouncing from the depths. The concrete panel shivered under Sergeant Hardy's boot. The faint sound of metal scraping against stone made everyone pause, hearts pounding, muscles coiled. Then, a whisper, dry, raspy, almost imperceptible. Could it have been wind? Perhaps, but every instinct told Donovan otherwise. The shadow of a figure, moving deliberately beneath the floor, made the hairs on her neck rise. The fissure in the concrete widened slightly, and dust cascaded downward, the faint outline of a dark passage stretching beneath the cell. A sudden clatter from a nearby vent drew all attention. Guards froze, flashlights swinging wildly. A distant voice shouted, orders spilling into the corridor like gunfire. "Back up!" Light up that wing. The echoes seemed to swallow the space, bouncing back off every surface in warped, distorted rhythm. Then, the floor beneath Sergeant Hardy shifted unexpectedly. A section of concrete tilted, revealing a dark, yawning shaft, a void into the unknown. Flashlights spun, catching the edges of the tunnel. The raw concrete exposed where months of clandestine labor had gone into chiseling the passage. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Someone moved. A shadowed figure slipped into the frame, blurred and indistinct, but the serpentine tattoo on the arm was unmistakable. Ramirez was inside the tunnel. Not alone. Perhaps with allies who had remained unseen. The radio crackled. Code red. Prison lockdown initiated. All personnel, hold your positions. The words thundered, reverberating through concrete, iron, and fear. Bars slammed, steel doors clanged, and the alarms wailed in a chilling chorus. Yet below it all, the tunnel waited silently. Investigator Donovan took a cautious step toward the fissure, heart pounding in sync with every metallic clang and distant footfall. Sergeant Hardy remained motionless, staring into the shadowed void, face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent light. The faintest movement from deep within the tunnel suggested one thing. Ramirez had not only escaped, but left a message in his wake. A calculated, deliberate challenge to everyone who thought they could contain him. The corridor of cell block D seemed to pulse with unseen energy. Every tattooed inmate, every guard, every investigator felt the weight of the walls, not just as barriers of containment, but as witnesses to a calculated, audacious plan. And beneath it all, the tunnel yawned, a black artery through the heart of Angola. The whispers of inmates, the creak of iron, the echo of boots, the hum of fluorescent lights, all became part of a tense symphony of fear and anticipation. Donovan knew one truth. This was only the beginning. What had been uncovered in the first hours of investigation was just the surface. Beneath the concrete and shadows, secrets festered, alliances moved silently, and danger awaited. As she leaned over the edge of the tunnel, dust rising in slow, almost spectral clouds, Donovan whispered to herself, "This is bigger than an escape. This is a message, and it's far from over." Somewhere in the darkness, the faint scrape of stone against metal whispered back. Ramirez had moved. The network was alive, and the walls of Angola held their breath for what was coming next. The prison wasn't just a facility. It was a battlefield, and the first move had already been made. The next morning, Cell Block D remained eerily silent under the harsh fluorescent lights. Lockdown protocols had been enacted overnight, reinforced by doubled security and a swarm of supervisors circling the upper catwalks. But inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every inmate sensed the shift. Even in their dorms, surrounded by concrete and steel, the whispers spread faster than a virus. Every tattooed arm, every inked knuckle and neck symboled history, gang allegiances, loyalties, warnings. And tonight, each would matter more than ever. Investigator Claire Donovan stood with a digital clipboard, the glow reflecting off her steel-framed glasses. She had been assigned to the internal investigation, tasked with untangling the threads of last night's chaos. Her colleagues were seasoned corrections experts, some former guards, others analysts specializing in criminal psychology, all trained to read the shadows in inmate behavior. But Angola had a way of bending even the sharpest minds. "Start with the surveillance logs," Donovan ordered. "Every camera, every timestamp, every anomaly." But the first obstacle appeared immediately. Cameras covering the southern wing were either tampered with or offline. The digital feeds had been overwritten, loops masking last night's events. Someone inside knew exactly how to manipulate the system. Meanwhile, in the cells, the ripple of suspicion grew. Marcus Scar Rivers lounged in his corner bunk, arms crossed, tattoos catching the fluorescent glare, a jagged crown across his forearm, coiled serpents down his biceps. He was calm, almost too calm, and that calm unnerved the guards. Scar had spent years reading people, observing weaknesses, and he could anticipate their moves like a chess master plotting 3 steps ahead. Across the block, Luis Coyote Ramirez, now officially a missing person in prison records, had a web of allies waiting to execute contingency plans. Tattoos snaked along his arms, fingers, and neck, each a silent testament to his rise within Angola's informal hierarchy. Some prisoners, loyal to him, remained tight-lipped under interrogation, eyes darting to walls and ceilings as though the shadows themselves might carry messages to him. Investigator Donovan began conducting interviews in the stark, steel-walled visitation room. Inmates shuffled in one by one, hands restrained, eyes wary. Each had tattoos, small symbols, initials, gang insignias, and each told stories in silence as much as words. The first inmate, a wiry man nicknamed Hammer, had inked hammers across his forearms and the year 2002 etched on his bicep. His testimony was hesitant. "I didn't see nothing," he murmured. But Donovan's trained eye caught the micro-expressions, a flicker of guilt, a twitch in the jaw. She pressed. "The tunnel. The floor. Did anyone help Ramirez?" Hammer shifted, silence stretching before he muttered, "I don't know, maybe." Conflicting statements mounted quickly. Some guards reported seeing suspicious activity near the southern corridor days before the escape attempt. Others claimed they noticed nothing. Prison gangs, informal alliances, and subtle manipulations made it nearly impossible to separate truth from deception. Donovan moved next to the logbooks and internal communications. Rotations of guards were checked and cross-referenced with timestamps. One particular guard, Rookie Jenkins, had been stationed near Ramirez's cell, but his logs were incomplete. When asked, he stammered, "I must have miswritten the time." His nervous glance swept over the investigators, and his knuckles flexed, faint tattoos of dice and cards visible in the dim light. Meanwhile, Marcus Rivers held court in the common area during lockdown, surrounded by other tattooed inmates. Conversation was subdued, whispers like coded signals. Scar's eyes scanned the perimeter as he spoke in low tones. "They trying to pin this on someone. Don't give them what they want." A dozen inmates nodded subtly, exchanging silent glances that revealed layers of loyalty and betrayal. Back in the control room, surveillance officers struggled to reconstruct fragmented footage. Shadows shifted, hands moving through doors, but key moments remained hidden. One thing was clear: the escape wasn't spontaneous. Someone had access, someone knew the schedule, and someone manipulated both inmates and guards to create the chaos. Prison psychologists were brought in to interpret the behavior. Interviews revealed rising tension among factions inside Cell Block D. Inmates who were previously indifferent were now signaling alliances, coded tattoos becoming a silent language of warnings and trust. The internal politics were as volatile as the prison walls themselves. Then, Donovan's team uncovered a shocking anomaly. Security logs indicated a temporary override of several cell locks, precisely at 2:13 a.m., matching the timestamp from the photo of Ramirez's escape. The override didn't come from a guard on duty. It came from the administrative panel in a nearby office, the same office that had been secured for weeks. Someone had bypassed protocol from inside, manipulating the electronic locks with precise timing. A tense meeting of investigators, senior guards, and prison administration was convened in a narrow, echoing briefing room. Donovan laid out the evidence: camera tampering, conflicting witness statements, insider access to electronic locks, and the unexplained disappearance of Luis Ramirez. "This isn't just an escape attempt," she concluded. "It's organized. Someone inside, someone with knowledge of the system, coordinated with inmates on the floor. And the level of planning. It's sophisticated. This isn't impulsive. It's strategic. And right now, we have no idea how deep it goes." Meanwhile, in the shadows of Cell Block D, whispers traveled quickly. Scar Rivers paced the narrow hallways, tattoos catching the flickering fluorescent lights, signaling orders with subtle gestures. He knew the investigation was closing in. He could feel the walls tightening around him and his allies. But he also knew something the investigators didn't. The real plan hadn't been discovered yet. As night fell, the prison descended into the uneasy calm of a lockdown. Guards moved in measured steps, flashlights cutting arcs through dark corridors. Every cell hum of fluorescent light revealed prisoners quietly counting allies, marking spaces, whispering coded messages. And deep below, the tunnel beneath Ramirez's last known cell remained a dark wound in the concrete floor. Only fragments of its path had been discovered. Its full extent, and who else might have used it, remained a mystery. The chapter closed on a chilling note. Donovan stared at the incomplete logs, the broken cameras, and the faint shadow of a tattooed arm slipping through the feed. Somewhere inside Angola, The missing inmate wasn't just hiding. He was orchestrating, manipulating, waiting. The internal investigation had begun, but the real danger had only just revealed itself. And what Donovan and her team didn't yet know would soon push the prison to the edge of chaos. The walls held secrets, the floor hid paths, and the shadows, long, blue-toned, unyielding, carried the whispers of betrayal that would shake Angola from the inside out. The lockdown had held for hours, but the tension in cell block D was electric, taut as steel cables. Guards moved through the narrow corridors in pairs, boots echoing against the concrete floors, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Yet inside, a silent war was brewing, one that no lockdown could contain. Marcus Scar Rivers leaned against the wall of the upper catwalk, his tattoos catching the harsh fluorescent glare, a jagged crown across his forearm, coiled serpents crawling down both biceps. Around him, his allies whispered in low tones, inked arms brushing against one another. Subtle gestures signaled instructions, alliances, and warnings. Scar's presence alone created a palpable tension. Guards instinctively gave his corner a wider berth, wary of the control he exerted even while confined. Down below, whispers of the missing Luis Coyote Ramirez traveled fast. His tattoos, snakes weaving up his forearms and the initials LR etched along his wrist, had become symbols of fear and influence, even among inmates who had never met him. Rumors suggested he wasn't alone. There were others loyal to him, waiting to enact a plan that investigators had yet to uncover. Investigator Claire Donovan moved through the surveillance room like a predator. Multiple camera feeds flickered, some were dead, some were looping. She leaned over a digital console, highlighting every anomaly. One camera feed revealed a figure slipping through a shadowed corridor at 2:14 a.m. Tattoos were visible on his forearms and neck, unmistakably Ramirez, accompanied by another inmate with a large dragon tattoo coiling around his right arm. The duo moved with careful precision, aware of patrol rotations, exploiting blind spots in the camera coverage. As Donovan relayed her findings to her team, the tension on the floor escalated. Guards were reporting subtle disruptions. Bunks shifted, conversations halted abruptly when they entered the corridor, and cryptic graffiti appeared overnight. Symbols and shorthand only the tattooed inmates understood. The cell block tension was rising, an invisible current vibrating through every brick and steel beam. Elsewhere, Rookie Jenkins, the young guard whose log discrepancies had been flagged, started noticing signs that his own actions were being monitored. His palms sweated over his baton, the tattoos on his knuckles, tiny cards and dice, twitching in the flickering light as he fumbled with his radio. A shadow moved outside the doorway. He froze. There was no sound except the distant hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint drip of water from the ceiling. Inside the common area, Scar moved among his allies, issuing orders with low, clipped phrases. Every tattooed arm that passed through his circle carried coded messages, warnings, instructions. Loyalty was currency here, and Scar was the banker. His eyes never left the investigators or the perimeter cameras. He knew they were watching, but he also knew how to manipulate perception, sowing fear while remaining untouchable. Donovan's team conducted further interviews. Hammer, a wiry inmate, now showed signs of stress. Tattoos along his forearm, chains and shackles, seemed to pulse under the harsh lights as he repeated, "I didn't see nothing," but subtle micro-expressions betrayed his knowledge of inside movements. His story conflicted with reports from another inmate, Viper, whose large snake tattoo slithered up his arm. Viper hinted at a clandestine meeting between Ramirez and other key inmates days before the escape attempt. Back in the surveillance room, Donovan spotted a breakthrough. Logs from the administrative panel revealed a temporary override that matched the time of Ramirez's disappearance. But it wasn't a single instance. There were multiple entries, almost random, indicating a pattern of repeated access. It was likely used to study the rotation of guards, the timing of lockdowns, and the placement of surveillance cameras. The sophistication was alarming. Someone was orchestrating a plan far beyond the capabilities of a single inmate. Pressure mounted on the guards. The prison's inner hierarchy shifted unpredictably. Tattooed gangs, once subdued under Scar's influence, began acting independently, testing loyalties, seeking advantage, and exploiting weaknesses in the system. Inmate altercations were minor but charged, subtle displays of power and intimidation designed to distract and unsettle the staff. During the mid-afternoon shift change, Donovan accompanied Sergeant Hardy on an inspection of the southern corridor. Footsteps echoed in the narrow space. Every doorway was meticulously examined. In the corner of the last wing, a fresh scratch along the concrete wall caught their attention. Tiny fragments of stone had fallen, as if someone had resumed digging where the previous tunnel had been discovered. A sudden shout pierced the hall. "Move it! Step back!" Boots clattered. The investigators and guards spun toward the sound. A small group of inmates had cornered a junior guard near a stairwell, tattoos exposed on their arms and necks, signaling allegiance and dominance. Scar's name was muttered under breath as the confrontation escalated, not with physical violence, but with a psychological edge, intimidation, threats veiled in silence, eyes that communicated more than words ever could. Donovan radioed the command center. "We need more coverage. Now. All blind spots. Every stairwell, every corner. Someone's moving with purpose inside this facility." The tension inside Angola now bordered on a powder keg. With inmates acting in coordinated patterns, surveillance disrupted, and internal alliances shifting unpredictably, the prison was no longer just a containment facility. It had become a chessboard of calculated risk, manipulation, and danger, with Ramirez and Scar as kingpins moving pieces in the shadows. As night descended, Donovan returned to the tunnel beneath Ramirez's former cell. Faint marks suggested the work had resumed, deliberate, measured. Dust hung in the air. Every creak of metal, every distant footstep was amplified in the stillness. She realized the internal investigation had revealed patterns, but no one yet knew the true scale of the plan. Ramirez's reach inside the prison was growing, and the internal chaos he'd seeded was accelerating. In the early hours, one guard on patrol discovered a hidden stash beneath a vent. Coded messages etched into paper scraps, detailing rotation schedules, potential weak points, and vague names of collaborators. Donovan recognized the handwriting immediately, Ramirez's signature style. Whoever thought this was just a simple escape attempt had underestimated the criminal psychology at play. Cell block D hummed with silent tension, the inmates watching, the guards unsure, the investigators probing. And deep below, the shadow of the tunnel stretched further than anyone had imagined. Somewhere in that darkness, Ramirez moved. And with each passing hour, the stakes climbed higher. Someone was going to break the rules tonight, and when they did, the consequences would ripple through the prison like an earthquake. The night ended with Donovan staring at the map of the block, lines and symbols drawn in red, blue, and black, representing threats, allies, and blind spots. The internal investigation had uncovered threads, but none of them yet revealed the true danger. And in the shadows of the high-security prison, every tattooed inmate, every guard, and every overlooked corner whispered the same warning. The walls of Angola were about to be tested like never before. Morning light filtered through narrow, barred windows, slicing pale beams across the worn concrete floor of cell block D. The prison felt different today, not quieter, but heavier. The tension in the corridors was palpable, almost sentient. Every echoing footstep, every shuffled bunk, every flash of a tattooed arm in the flickering lights was a message, a warning, a clue. Investigator Claire Donovan convened a meeting with the prison's senior staff. Surveillance footage, cross-checked logs, and witness statements were laid out on a long metal table. Each red mark, each annotation told a story. They had now mapped nearly all the inmates' movements during the chaos, and the patterns began to reveal a disturbing truth. Scar Rivers emerged as a pivotal figure, not the mastermind of the escape, but a facilitator. Tattoos on his forearms, jagged crowns and coiled serpents, symbolized influence and intimidation, but also loyalty and trust among inmates. Scar had been gathering information from various sources, manipulating the flow of intelligence, and using subtle gestures and alliances to direct other inmates' behavior. Then came the breakthrough. One of the junior guards, Rookie Jenkins, who had been inconsistent in his logs, finally cracked under pressure. His knuckles tattooed with tiny dice flexed as he explained, not all details, but enough to reveal that a small administrative faction had been compromised. Someone with access to the electronic lock system had been feeding information to select inmates, including Ramirez. The insider wasn't a guard on duty. It was someone in a position of technical authority, trusted enough to override cell doors and manipulate the surveillance feed. Meanwhile, inmate Viper, the snake-tattooed figure seen moving with Ramirez, gave a key piece of information. Through a carefully structured series of interviews conducted under strict supervision, Donovan discovered that several inmates had been recruited months in advance. Their motivations varied: vengeance, promises of influence, survival, and occasionally, a thrill for testing the system. Tattoos along arms and necks became more than identifiers. They were symbols of allegiance, marking the web of cooperation Ramirez had meticulously built. The tunnel beneath Ramirez's former cell now revealed its full significance. Dust and debris analysis showed that multiple inmates had been involved in its construction, taking shifts to avoid detection. The path wasn't random. It connected the southern wing to a rarely patrolled maintenance corridor, which, if completed, would have allowed a direct escape route outside Angola's walls. Prison psychologists began profiling the inmates involved. Patterns of criminal psychology emerged: calculated risk-taking, manipulation, loyalty enforcement, and suppression of fear through authority and intimidation. Scar's role, for example, was both psychological and physical, ensuring that smaller players in the conspiracy didn't break under stress, all while maintaining the illusion of ordinary prison life for investigators and guards. For Donovan, the revelation was chilling. Ramirez wasn't merely exploiting security lapses. He had orchestrated a complex social network inside Angola, manipulating both inmates and unwitting guards, exploiting internal tensions, and using cell block politics as a weapon. Each tattooed inmate played a role, silently reinforcing the plan through subtle intimidation, coded messages, and carefully timed interactions. In the control room, surveillance teams pieced together fragmented footage. Shadows revealed figures passing small objects through gaps in bars, subtle nods in corridors, and brief interactions in blind spots where cameras failed. Inmates who appeared isolated were actually critical nodes in the network, moving information and ensuring coordination. The prison's administration began to understand the extent of internal corruption. Staff who had been trusted implicitly had, whether knowingly or unknowingly, contributed to the escape attempt. This realization prompted immediate changes: stricter surveillance protocols, staff rotation revisions, and increased monitoring of all technical access points. Yet the most troubling discovery came from forensic analysis of Ramirez's notes, found hidden beneath a vent. Detailed sketches mapped out blind spots, guard rotations, and structural vulnerabilities. The writings revealed not only the escape plan, but also potential blackmail material, exploiting rivalries and weaknesses within the prison hierarchy. Ramirez had anticipated every move investigators might make, every potential lockdown response, every guard reaction, except one: the persistence of Donovan and her team. Back in the cell blocks, Scar Rivers and his closest allies felt the pressure mounting. Tattoos caught the intermittent light as they readjusted plans, whispered coded warnings, and shifted allegiances. One misstep, one loose word, and the entire operation could unravel. And with investigators closing in, the delicate balance of power inside Angola was fracturing. By late afternoon, Donovan pieced together a timeline. The escape attempt was not a spontaneous act of desperation, but the culmination of months of coordination, manipulation, and calculated risk. Every movement had a motive. Every interaction was part of a larger, intricate puzzle. Ramirez had been leveraging fear, loyalty, and intimidation to engineer a plan that could have succeeded if not for the swift response from surveillance and the meticulous investigation. But the final revelation hit hard. Scar Rivers, previously seen as merely influential, was in fact the linchpin holding the network together inside the prison. His tattoos were symbols of power, yes, but also silent contracts, commitments that bound other inmates to his will, sometimes by loyalty, sometimes by fear. The realization reframed the investigation. It wasn't just about catching Ramirez. It was about dismantling the web of influence that allowed such a meticulously planned operation to take root inside a high-security prison. As the sun set over Angola, shadows stretched across concrete floors and steel bars. Every echo in the hallways whispered of loyalty and betrayal, of risk and strategy. Investigators now understood the plan, the alliances, and the potential outcomes. But the danger was far from over. The prison's internal structure had been tested, vulnerabilities exposed, and the silent networks of inmates, all tattooed, all calculated, remained active, waiting for the next opportunity. Chapter 4 ended with Donovan staring at the map of the prison, her finger tracing the intricate connections between cells, surveillance points, and inmate locations. One truth was undeniable. The walls of Angola had witnessed only part of the story. The truth behind the walls was more intricate, more dangerous, and more psychologically complex than anyone could have imagined. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, Scar Rivers and Ramirez's remaining allies were already adjusting their strategy. Every decision, every movement, would decide who survived, who was exposed, and who remained in control as the countdown to the next crisis began. Night had fallen over Angola, the high-security prison now cloaked in an oppressive darkness. The only light came from the stark white of surveillance cameras and the occasional flicker of old fluorescent bulbs. For hours, the prison had been holding its breath. The tension was so thick you could feel it, heavy and cold, hanging in the air like a dense fog. Investigator Claire Donovan moved cautiously through the corridors, flanked by senior guards and forensic officers. Every shadow seemed to move, and every echo sounded like a threat. The internal investigation had been a long one. It uncovered a deep network of corruption, manipulated security logs, and secret alliances among inmates whose loyalties were etched in tattooed ink. But now, the challenge wasn't just about untangling the past. It was about stopping what was happening right now. They had to contain the threat, apprehend the mastermind, a man named Ramirez, and dismantle his organized plan from the inside out. Cell Block D was eerily quiet. Inmates sat on their bunks, their bodies shifting in the flickering light. You could see the tattoos glinting on their skin, snakes, crowns, daggers, dates, symbols of loyalty and survival permanently marked on their arms, necks, and hands. Each one of these marked men was a piece of the conspiracy that Donovan had spent weeks trying to understand. From the shadows of the upper catwalk, another inmate, Marcus Scar Rivers, watched everything unfold. He had a jagged crown tattooed across his forearm and serpents coiled along his biceps. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He had always maintained tight control over his faction, communicating with subtle gestures, quiet whispers, and even coded tattoos. But even Scar could feel the walls closing in. He knew the investigators were watching every move, timing every action, and reading the patterns. And Ramirez? He was out there somewhere, still inside the walls, but on the move. Rumor had it he was trying to get to a tunnel hidden beneath the southern wing of the prison. Suddenly, the command center radio crackled to life. Visual on movement near the maintenance corridor, a surveillance officer announced. Donovan and her team moved swiftly, their boots clanging on the concrete. They moved with caution, their flashlights sweeping across the darkened corridors, illuminating tattoos, gang insignias, and fleeting shadows in the corners. Then, they heard it, a faint scuffle, a whispered curse, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Ramirez. The coiled snake tattoo on his left forearm was unmistakable. He was moving with a quiet, deadly precision. Right behind him, a smaller inmate with a dragon tattoo on his arm followed closely. They had clearly studied the guard rotations, exploited the security blind spots, and navigated the prison's labyrinthine corridors with an uncanny knowledge of the layout. "Stop! Now!" Donovan's voice cut through the silence like a knife. The guards immediately tightened their formation, creating a wall of bodies. Ramirez froze. The tunnel he was heading for had been partially discovered earlier, and the investigators had used that knowledge to funnel him into this exact spot, a controlled path with no exit. But he wasn't ready to surrender just yet. Every step he took was deliberate, every motion carefully calculated. Just then, Scar Rivers appeared on the upper catwalk, looking down at the scene. His eyes met Ramirez's. The tattoos on both men seemed to catch the harsh glare of the flashlights. For a moment, they had a silent conversation, a complete understanding passing between them without a single word. Ramirez paused. He realized his internal network, the one he had built so carefully, was disintegrating under the pressure of the investigation. The loyalty and fear he once commanded had shifted. Scar's faction was now constrained, strategically neutralized by the investigators. A tense standoff ensued in the maintenance corridor. Flashlights cut sharp arcs of light across the concrete walls, revealing angry scowls, clenched fists, and a sea of tattoos. Slowly, Ramirez raised his hands, his eyes darting around, still calculating his options. The guards flanked him, their hands on their radios, muscles tense and ready for anything. Luis Ramirez, you're under arrest, Donovan stated firmly. Any resistance will be met with force. For a heartbeat, the entire corridor seemed to hold its breath. Inmate eyes darted from Scar to Ramirez to the guards, everyone weighing the risks, calculating their next move. Ramirez's accomplice, the one with the dragon tattoo, froze as well, finally realizing that escape was no longer an option. Then, Ramirez slowly lowered his head. He took one last glance toward the tunnel below, the result of months of work, the escape route he had so meticulously carved, and he stepped forward. From the catwalk above, Scar gave a subtle nod. It was a signal of compliance, no more moves. The network had officially collapsed. The guards moved in, securing both Ramirez and his accomplice. Every footstep echoed through the corridors, a loud punctuation mark on the end of their failed plan. The cameras, now all fully operational, recorded the entire apprehension. The high-security prison, its walls, bars, cameras, and guards, had reclaimed control. In the hours that followed, investigators conducted their final interviews. Scar Rivers and his allies, their tattooed bodies covered in symbols of their past, were questioned thoroughly. Psychological profiling of the inmates revealed the intricate ways alliances had been manipulated. It showed how fear and loyalty had been exploited, and how the entire chaotic escape attempt had been premeditated and orchestrated with cold precision. The escape plan, while ambitious, had been doomed from the moment investigators traced the tunnel, started monitoring the camera blind spots, and coordinated the staff rotations to counter their moves. By early morning, the aftermath was clear. Ramirez and his accomplice were isolated, placed under strict solitary confinement. Scar River's influence within the prison had been significantly curtailed. Internal protocols were completely rewritten. Camera placements were optimized, and staff rotations were revised to prevent anyone from exploiting the system like this again. But Angola prison remained what it always was, an ecosystem of tension, loyalty, and survival. The tattoos still marked the inmates, silent symbols of their identity, their allegiance, and their history. Cell Block D eventually resumed its familiar rhythm, but the memory of the escape attempt lingered like a shadow over every interaction. The guards, the investigators, and the inmates all carried the knowledge that the walls were not just barriers. They were witnesses, they were silent judges, and sometimes they were even accomplices. In her final report, investigator Donovan wrote that Ramirez's plan had exposed deep systemic vulnerabilities, internal corruption, and the delicate balance of power that exists inside a high-security prison. The psychological insights they had gained about the manipulation of loyalty, fear, and authority would go on to inform new procedures and policies for years to come. But more importantly, it was a stark reminder to everyone that inside a facility like Angola, no wall is truly impenetrable, and no network of inmates can ever be fully predicted. As daylight broke across the high walls of the prison, Donovan walked the corridors one last time. The beams of the flashlights reflected off the steel bars, the tattoos of the inmates glinted in the morning light, and she whispered to herself, "The story isn't over, it's just changed." And somewhere deep within the labyrinth of cells and tunnels, a faint shadow lingered, a reminder that even after the final confrontation, Angola's walls still held secrets just waiting to surface. If this prison case stunned you, the next one we're covering is even darker. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss it.